March 4th, 2026, 4:17 local time. Strait of Hormuz. 22 objects skim across the Persian Gulf at 40 knots. They sit 3 inches above the waterline. Their radar cross-section is smaller than a seagull, and they are heading directly toward a United States Navy destroyer. The crew of the USS Laboon has 90 seconds to figure out what they are. They will not get all 90. Modern navies are not supposed to be caught off guard by small boats. The U.S. Fifth Fleet has operated in the Persian Gulf for over 4 decades. It has tracked Iranian fast attack craft, intercepted smuggling dhows, and monitored IRGC naval exercises thousands of times. Every threat in these waters has a profile, a signature, a known pattern. But these are not fast boats. They are not manned, and the pattern they are following was not developed in Iran. It was developed in Ukraine, on the Black Sea, against the Russian Navy. And nobody at U.S. Naval Forces Central Command saw it coming. I'm your host at Navy Battlefront, where we break down the most critical naval operations shaping global power. Today, we are reconstructing a confrontation that exposed the single greatest gap in American naval defense doctrine since the USS Cole bombing in 2000. A gap that existed not because the technology was unknown, but because the wrong enemy learned how to use it. To understand what happened in the Strait of Hormuz on March 4th, 2026, you have to go back 5 months, to the Black Sea, to a war that had already rewritten the rules of naval combat. October 2025. Ukrainian naval forces were in the middle of their most successful maritime drone campaign of the entire war. The Magura V5, a low-profile, semi-autonomous explosive sea drone, had already sunk or disabled over a dozen Russian vessels. Patrol boats, landing ships, a Rapucha-class amphibious transport, even a Bayan M corvette equipped with anti-ship missiles. The Magura V5 is not a sophisticated weapon by Western standards. It is approximately 5.5 meters long. It weighs around 1,000 kilograms. It carries a warhead between 200 and 320 kilograms of high explosive, depending on the variant. Its maximum speed is roughly 42 knots. It uses a combination of GPS guidance and a video feed transmitted back to an operator who can steer it during the terminal phase. What makes it lethal is not any single specification. It is the doctrine behind it. Ukraine did not use these drones one at a time. It launched them in coordinated swarms, 5, 10, 15 at once, from different directions, at different speeds. Some drones were decoys, cheap expendable platforms designed to draw defensive fire. Others carried full warheads and approached from the blind spots created by the decoys. Russian naval defenses, designed to counter anti-ship missiles and conventional surface threats, struggled to cope. A missile comes in at altitude. It has a defined radar signature. It follows predictable flight profiles. A sea-skimming drone 3 inches off the water, traveling at the speed of a fast boat, but with no crew, no heat signature from an engine room, and a radar return smaller than a fishing buoy. That is a fundamentally different problem. By November 2025, the Ukrainian Playbook was the most studied asymmetric naval doctrine on the planet. NATO analysts had published assessments. Think tanks had written white papers. The U.S. Naval War College had incorporated Black Sea drone operations into its curriculum. Everyone was studying it, including Iran. According to intelligence assessments compiled after the March 4th incident, Iran's interest in Ukrainian maritime drone technology began as early as mid-2024. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy, the IRGCN, had long operated its own fleet of fast attack craft and explosive-laden boats. The concept of using unmanned surface vehicles for naval attack was not new to Tehran. What was new was the scale and coordination Ukraine had demonstrated. Sources familiar with the intelligence indicated that Iranian acquisition of Magura V5 design data occurred through intermediary networks, not directly from Ukraine. Fragments of destroyed drones recovered from Black Sea engagements had entered gray market channels. Technical specifications, hull design parameters, guidance system architectures, pieces of data that individually meant little, but assembled together provided a comprehensive blueprint. Iranian engineers at the IRGC's Aerospace Force Research Center in Semnan did not simply copy the Magura V5, they adapted it. The Iranian variant, which U.S. intelligence would later designate the Shahab-S, was slightly wider, with a modified catamaran hull optimized for the warmer, calmer waters of the Persian Gulf. It carried a 280-kilogram shaped charge warhead specifically designed for penetrating naval hull plating below the waterline. Its guidance system used an Iranian-built inertial navigation unit paired with a satellite uplink for terminal guidance corrections. And critically, the Shahab-S had a radar cross-section of approximately 0.001 square meters. That is roughly equivalent to a large bird. The IRGCN tested the first prototypes in late December 2025 in the Gulf of Oman, east of Jask. Satellite imagery captured by U.S. reconnaissance later revealed the test range, a series of decommissioned barges anchored offshore, pitted with impact craters. But the imagery was not analyzed in real time. It was flagged as routine IRGC naval training activity. The barges were catalogued. The analysis moved to the bottom of a priority queue. This was the first failure. The intelligence was there. It was collected, photographed, stored, and then it was buried under 1,500 other collection tasks across CENTCOM's area of responsibility. Nobody connected Iranian barge tests in December with Ukrainian drone tactics from October. Nobody asked the obvious question: what is Iran building that needs target barges? February 2026, the USS Laboon, DDG-58, deployed to the Persian Gulf as part of Carrier Strike Group 2, supporting the USS Harry S. Truman. The Laboon is an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, Flight 1 variant. Displacement: 8,315 tons. Length: 505 feet. Armed with 90 vertical launch cells carrying a mix of standard missiles, Tomahawk cruise missiles, and evolved Sea Sparrow missiles. She carries a 5-inch/54 caliber main gun, two 25mm Mark 38 chain guns, two Phalanx CIWS close-in weapon systems, and 6 torpedo tubes. On paper, the Laboon is one of the most capable surface combatants on the planet. On paper. The destroyer was assigned to escort duty south of the Strait of Hormuz, screening the Truman as the carrier conducted flight operations in the Gulf of Oman. This is a standard mission. The Fifth Fleet rotates destroyers through escort positions on a predictable schedule. The routes vary slightly, but the operational pattern is well known. It is known to the IRGCN because they have watched it for 30 years. March 3, 2026. 2200 local time, 6 hours before the engagement. An IRGC coastal surveillance unit at Bandar-e-Jask confirmed the Laboon's position via commercial maritime tracking data, freely available online through AIS transponder feeds. The destroyer was heading southeast at 18 knots, approximately 40 nautical miles south of the Iranian coastline. Its escort position placed it between the Truman and the Iranian shore, exactly where the IRGCN wanted it. At 23:30, launch teams at 3 concealed sites along the Jask coastline began final preparations. The Shahab-S drones were stored in modified shipping containers, standard 20-foot intermodal units, indistinguishable from commercial cargo. Each container held 4 drones, pre-fueled and pre-programmed with initial waypoints. 3 sites, 6 containers, 22 operational drones plus 2 spares. The containers were positioned on commercial loading docks adjacent to fishing harbors. They had been in place for 11 days. No unusual vehicle traffic. No military presence visible from overhead reconnaissance. The IRGCN had learned from the Houthis hide military assets inside civilian infrastructure, and satellite surveillance becomes almost useless. This was the second failure. U.S. intelligence had identified the JASC area as a potential IRGCN staging point months earlier. But persistent surveillance assets, drones, satellites, maritime patrol aircraft, were allocated to higher priority targets: Iran's ballistic missile sites, nuclear facilities, and IRGC Quds force logistics hubs in Syria. The fishing harbors at JASC were checked once every 72 hours. The containers had been photographed. They looked like containers, because that is exactly what they were designed to look like. March 4th, 3:45 local time. The first container doors opened. Hydraulic ramps deployed. The drones slid into the water on rails, their electric motors activating on contact. The launch was staggered. 4 drones every 90 seconds from each of the 3 sites. Total launch time, 8 minutes and 30 seconds. By 03:54, all 22 Shahab-S drones were in the water, running southeast at 22 knots on their initial transit heading. At this speed, they would reach the Laboon's projected position in approximately 1 hour and 40 minutes. But speed would increase to 40 knots during the terminal phase, the last 6 nautical miles. The drones ran in 3 groups of 7, plus 1 trailing element of 1. They maintained a spread formation at intervals of roughly 400 meters, reducing the chance that a single radar sweep would identify them as a coordinated group. Their navigation was fully autonomous during transit. No radio emissions, no satellite uplinks, no electronic signature of any kind. To the Laboon's sensors, the Persian Gulf was quiet. 4:11, the Laboon's AN/SPS-67 surface search radar, a legacy system designed primarily for navigation and surface contact tracking, picked up intermittent returns at 11.2 nautical miles. The returns were inconsistent. They appeared and vanished between sweeps. The radar operator, Petty Officer 2nd Class Miguel Herrera, logged the contacts as possible sea clutter. The Gulf frequently produces false returns from wave action, particularly during the pre-dawn hours when thermal layering affects radar propagation. Herrera noted 7 intermittent contacts on a bearing of 342 degrees. He classified them as environmental. He did not alert the Combat Information Center watch officer. This was the 3rd failure, and the most human one. Herrera was not incompetent. He was experienced. He had served 2 previous Gulf deployments, and in his experience, intermittent low-return contacts at 11 miles in a body of water known for clutter were almost always nothing. Almost always. 4:14, 3 minutes later. The Laboon's AN/SPY-1D phased array radar, the backbone of the Aegis combat system, was operating in its standard air defense mode, scanning for aerial threats. It was not optimized for small surface contacts at sea level. The SPY-1D can detect surface targets, but its primary mission architecture prioritizes missiles and aircraft. Small wave-skimming objects with radar cross-sections below 0.01 square meters fall below the system's default detection threshold, unless operators manually adjust sensitivity parameters. No one had adjusted the parameters, because no one expected sea drones. This is critical to understanding what happened next. The USS Laboon was equipped with one of the most advanced radar systems ever built. It can track over 100 airborne targets simultaneously. It can guide missiles to intercept supersonic threats at ranges exceeding 100 nautical miles. But it was looking up, not down. 4:17. The Shahab-S drones entered their terminal phase. Speed increased from 22 to 40 knots. The trailing groups compressed into a converging attack formation, 3 axes of approach, separated by roughly 35 degrees of arc. At 4.2 nautical miles, the SPS-67 finally registered consistent returns, multiple contacts, moving fast. Herrera saw them this time. Not clutter, not fishing boats. 14 distinct radar tracks, bearing 330 through 005, closing at 40 knots. He hit the alert. The words came through the ship's 1MC announcement system at 4:17 and 41 seconds. Surface contacts, multiple inbound, bearing 330 to 005, range 4.2 miles, closing fast. All hands to battle stations. Comment Laboon if you think the crew had enough time to respond to what came next. And subscribe to Navy Battlefront if you want to see how the U.S. Navy is adapting to threats like this. Because what happened in the next 112 seconds changed American naval doctrine overnight. Captain Jennifer Walsh, commanding officer of the USS Laboon, was in her cabin when the alert sounded. She reached the CIC in 58 seconds. By the time she arrived, the tactical picture had evolved and worsened. The initial radar tracks had resolved into 3 distinct groups, but the total count was now 22. The AN/SPS-67, now actively scanning the surface arc, had picked up the trailing elements that the lead groups had previously masked. The contacts were not approaching in a random scatter. They were converging in a coordinated pattern, a 3-axis pincer with the Laboon at the center. Walsh's first order was immediate. Weapons free on all inbound surface contacts. CIWS to auto. Chain guns, engage at maximum effective range. The Phalanx CIWS, the ship's automated last-line defense, slewed toward the nearest contacts. The system is designed to engage anti-ship missiles. It fires 20mm tungsten rounds at 4,500 rounds per minute. Against a missile traveling at Mach 2, it is devastating. Against a target 3 inches above the waterline, traveling at 40 knots, with a radar return smaller than a seagull, the Phalanx had problems. The system's radar tracker struggled with sea clutter at the engagement altitude. Waves at the surface created a noise floor that degraded the CIWS track quality. The first Phalanx engagement, port side, fired a burst of approximately 200 rounds at the lead drone in the northern group at 2.1 nautical miles. Post-engagement analysis confirmed no hits. The rounds impacted the water behind and above the target. The system had been calibrated for objects flying, not floating. Starboard Phalanx engaged a second later. Same result. Burst of fire. Rounds tracking high. The drone continued closing. Walsh did not wait for a third attempt. She ordered the 25mm chain guns to manual engagement. The Mark 38 Mod 2 chain gun is a stabilized, optically aimed weapon. It fires at 180 rounds per minute. Its effective range against surface targets is approximately 2,500 meters. But against a fast-moving object barely visible above the waves at night, the gunners needed the electro-optical sight, thermal imaging, to cut through the darkness. Gunner's mate, first class. David Park, manning the starboard Mark 38, was the first to acquire a target visually. Through the thermal sight, the drones appeared as faint, warm streaks against the cooler ocean surface. Park identified the lead drone of the eastern group at 1.8 nautical miles and opened fire. His first burst, 12 rounds, missed ahead. The drone was faster than any small craft he had ever engaged. He adjusted. Second burst, 6 rounds, 1 impact. The drone detonated. The explosion was immediate and violent. A 280-kilogram shaped charge warhead, detonating on the surface, produced a fireball visible to the naked eye from the Laboon's bridge. The blast column rose 60 feet. Park later described the moment in his after-action statement. "It lit up the whole ocean. I could see the other ones coming." The other ones. 21 drones remained. 3 groups, converging from 3 directions. Range closing through 1 nautical mile. The CIC tactical display showed the problem in brutal clarity. Even with both chain guns firing and both Phalanx systems engaging, the rate of fire could not cover 3 approach vectors simultaneously. Standard defensive doctrine for fast boat swarms assumed human crewed vessels approaching from a single general bearing, not autonomous platforms attacking from 3 coordinated axes. The Laboon's AN/SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite attempted to jam the drone's guidance systems. Broadband noise across standard remote control frequencies. GPS disruption. Nothing worked. The Shahab-S drones were not receiving external commands during the terminal phase. They were navigating on inertial guidance with a preloaded target waypoint. There was nothing to jam. Walsh ordered the helmsman to emergency flank speed. The Laboon surged forward, her 4 LM-2500 gas turbines pushing 100,000 shaft horsepower to the screws. The destroyer accelerated through 28 knots, then 30, heading southeast, opening range and forcing the drones to chase rather than converge. It was the right call. The maneuver bought time. 15 seconds of additional engagement window. Park and his counterpart on the port chain gun, gunner's mate second class Tanya Reed, were firing continuously. The thermal sights showed streaks of white heat approaching from 3 directions. Tracers laced across the water. Explosions marked kills. Sharp, bright detonations as warheads cooked off. The Phalanx systems recalibrated. One of the fire control technicians, Chief Petty Officer Alan Briggs, manually overrode the system's default engagement altitude and lowered the tracking gate to sea level. The port Phalanx locked on and shredded a drone at 900 meters. Then another. The starboard system found its target seconds later. But the drones were inside the defensive envelope now. Range under 800 meters. Closing at 40 knots. That distance vanishes in under 8 seconds. 3 drones penetrated the outer defensive ring. The first came from bearing 350, the northern group. It passed between the Phalanx engagement arcs and bore down on the Laboon's port quarter. Reed's chain gun tracked it, firing burst after burst. At 400 meters, she hit it. The drone exploded, throwing shrapnel against the destroyer's hull. Fragments peppered the port side above the waterline. Superficial damage. No casualties. The second came from bearing 020, the eastern group. Park engaged it at 600 meters and scored a direct hit. It detonated 580 meters from the ship. Close enough for the shockwave to rattle the bridge windows. The third came from bearing 345. It was the closest any Shahab-S drone would get to a U.S. warship. Park's gun was tracking east. Reed's was reloading. The port Phalanx had lost track lock after the previous engagement. For 3.5 seconds, this drone was unengaged. It reached 320 meters from the Laboon's hull. Chief Briggs, working the Phalanx override console, reacquired the target manually. The system fired as 1,200 round burst. At 320 meters, at a target traveling 40 knots. The drone disintegrated. Its warhead detonated from kinetic impact, not fusing. The explosion sent a water column crashing against the Laboon's port side. Seawater flooded the main deck. 2 sailors on a damage control team were knocked off their feet. One sustained a broken wrist. 4:19 and 33 seconds, 112 seconds after the first alert. The radar screen cleared. All 22 drones were destroyed. 19 by weapons fire from the Laboon. 3 by premature detonation, their warheads likely triggered by wave impacts during the high-speed terminal run. The USS Laboon had survived. No hull breach, no critical system damage, 1 minor casualty. But Captain Walsh knew this was not a victory. This was a warning. She transmitted an emergency OPREP-3 Pinnacle report directly to NavCent headquarters in Bahrain. The message, classified secret, contained 4 words that would trigger the most significant change in U.S. Gulf naval operations in 2 decades: maritime drone swarm attack. Within 40 minutes, Vice Admiral Catherine Reeves, commander of U.S. Naval Forces Central Command, was in the NavCent Operations Center in Manama. The Laboon's tactical data was streaming in real time. Radar recordings, CIWS engagement logs, Thermal video from the chain gun sites. Reeves watched the footage. 22 drones, 3 axes, 40 knots. Coordinated convergence on a single warship. According to sources familiar with the briefing, Reeves said one sentence before issuing her first order. "This is the Black Sea. In our water." She was right. The attack profile was a near-exact replication of Ukrainian maritime drone tactics, adapted for Persian Gulf geography and directed against an American warship instead of a Russian one. NAVCENT issued an emergency tactical bulletin at 5:30 local time, less than 90 minutes after the engagement. The bulletin, designated TACBUL 26-003, revised all escort and patrol procedures for U.S. naval vessels operating within 60 nautical miles of the Iranian coastline. The revisions were sweeping. Surface search radar protocols changed immediately. All SPY-1D equipped ships were ordered to maintain a dedicated surface track mode, concurrent with air defense scanning, something that had never been standard procedure. SPS-67 operators received new classification criteria. Any surface contact with a speed exceeding 25 knots and a radar cross-section below 0.01 square meters was to be classified as a potential hostile drone until visually confirmed otherwise. Chain gun crews shifted to continuous readiness when operating in Iranian coastal waters. Previously, the Mark 38 chain gun was manned during heightened alert conditions. Now it would be manned permanently. But the most significant change involved aviation assets. Within 48 hours, NAVCENT repositioned 4 additional MH-60R Seahawk helicopters to Bahrain, specifically for surface drone interdiction. These Seahawks, normally tasked with anti-submarine warfare and surface search, were loaded with AGM-114 Hellfire missiles and door-mounted M240 machine guns. Their new mission: fly ahead of escort formations and hunt maritime drones before they reached engagement range of the ships they were protecting. It was a mission the Seahawk community had never formally trained for. The helicopter crews were adapting anti-surface warfare tactics in real time, writing new procedures between flights, testing engagement profiles against simulated drone targets towed behind patrol boats. Commander Rachel Torres, leading the hastily formed drone interdiction detachment, described the situation in a communication to her chain of command. "We are building the aircraft while flying it. The threat exists now. The doctrine does not." The Pentagon's response was equally urgent, but slower to materialize. On March 6th, Secretary of Defense issued a classified directive ordering an immediate review of all Fifth Fleet defensive postures against unmanned surface threats. The Defense Innovation Unit in Silicon Valley was tasked with accelerating 3 separate counter-drone programs that had been in development but not yet fielded. One of those programs, a ship-mounted directed energy weapon capable of disabling small surface craft at ranges up to 3 nautical miles, had been tested at White Sands Missile Range 6 months earlier. It worked, but it was not scheduled for fleet deployment until 2028. After March 4th, the timeline was compressed to 10 months. The intelligence community conducted its own reckoning. The National Maritime Intelligence Center in Suitland, Maryland, pulled every satellite image of the JASC coastline from the preceding 6 months. The shipping containers, the barge tests in December, the increased IRGCN small boat activity near the launch sites in February. All of it was there. All of it had been collected. None of it had been synthesized into a coherent threat picture. A senior analyst at NMIC, speaking to the Internal Review Board, identified the core problem. "We were looking for missiles. We were looking for fast boats. We were looking for mines. We were not looking for something that looked like a Ukrainian weapon built in an Iranian factory and launched from a shipping container at a fishing dock." The failure was not technical. It was conceptual. The intelligence community had categorized Iranian naval threats based on decades of observed behavior: fast attack craft, anti-ship missiles, mines, and submarines. Maritime drones were in a different mental category. They were a European war innovation, a Ukrainian specialty, something that happened in the Black Sea. Nobody had updated the threat model to account for technology transfer. The diplomatic fallout was immediate and complex. Iran denied involvement. The IRGC's official statement, released through state media on March 5th, claimed the engagement was a fabrication designed to justify American aggression in the Persian Gulf. Tehran pointed to the lack of physical evidence. The drones had been destroyed, leaving minimal recoverable debris in deep water. But U.S. Navy salvage teams, working with unmanned underwater vehicles, recovered fragments of 3 Shahab-S drones from the seabed within 72 hours. Hull material analysis confirmed Iranian-manufactured marine-grade aluminum. Circuit board components matched known IRGC procurement networks, and the shaped-charge warhead design bore unmistakable similarities to Iranian anti-armor munitions already in the intelligence database. The evidence was conclusive. The denial was performative. At the United Nations, the U.S. ambassador presented a classified briefing to the Security Council on March 8th. Russia vetoed a proposed condemnation resolution. China abstained. The diplomatic outcome was predictable and, from a military perspective, irrelevant. What mattered was the strategic reality the engagement had exposed. Iran had successfully adapted a combat-proven drone doctrine from one theater of war to another. It had done so using commercially available components, reverse-engineered foreign technology, and concealment methods that defeated the most extensive surveillance apparatus in the world. And it had come within 320 meters of hitting a U.S. destroyer. The USS Laboon's crew performed exceptionally. Captain Walsh's decision to go to flank speed and open range was textbook, but it was textbook that did not exist before March 4th. Chief Briggs's manual override of the Phalanx system was an improvisation that saved the ship from potential catastrophic damage. Park and Reed's gunnery under fire was extraordinary. 19 kills in under 2 minutes with manually aimed chain guns against targets barely visible in thermal imaging. But the next attack might not involve 22 drones. It might involve 50 or 100, launched from multiple coastline segments, targeting multiple ships simultaneously, with some drones carrying electronic warfare payloads to blind the very sensors the Navy is now relying on. Subscribe to Navy Battlefront for the full analysis of how the Navy is adapting, because the race between maritime drone offense and naval defense is just beginning. The strategic implications extended beyond the Gulf. China was watching. North Korea was watching. Every nation with a coastline and access to commercial drone technology was studying what Iran had demonstrated: that a relatively inexpensive swarm of unmanned surface vehicles could threaten a warship worth $2 billion. The cost asymmetry was staggering. Each Shahab-S drone was estimated to cost between $50,000 and $80,000. 22 of them totaled roughly $1.5 million. The defensive munitions the Laboon expended, Phalanx rounds, 25mm ammunition, and the operational costs of the engagement, exceeded $4 million. An attacker spending $1.5 million forced a defender to spend nearly 3 times that in a single 2-minute engagement. Scale that calculus to a sustained campaign, dozens of attacks over weeks, and the economics become untenable. This is the same math that Ukraine demonstrated against Russia. This is the same math that the Houthis demonstrated against commercial shipping in the Red Sea. And now it is the same math that Iran demonstrated against the United States Navy. Congress demanded answers. On March 12th, the Senate Armed Services Committee held a closed hearing with NAVCENT leadership. The questions were pointed. Why was the threat not anticipated? Why were defensive systems not configured for sea-skimming drones? Why were surveillance assets insufficient to detect the launch preparations? Admiral Reeves testified for 3 hours. Her core message was blunt. The Navy built its Gulf defense architecture to counter the threats we observed. Iran built a threat we had not observed. The technology transfer from the Ukrainian theater to the Iranian theater occurred faster than our intelligence cycle could adapt. One senator reportedly asked whether the Navy had learned nothing from the Houthis. Reeves responded that the Houthi drone campaign primarily used aerial drones and anti-ship ballistic missiles, a different threat, set requiring different defenses. The maritime surface drone, autonomous, sea-skimming, and radar invisible, was a distinct category that the fleet's existing sensors and weapons were not optimized to counter. She was not wrong, but being right about the distinction provided little comfort. The broader lesson of March 4, 2026, is not about Iran. It is not about drones. It is about the speed of adaptation in modern warfare. Ukraine invented a new way to fight at sea. Within 18 months, that method was replicated by a nation on the other side of the world, modified for local conditions, and deployed against the most powerful navy in history. The U.S. Navy stopped the first attack. 19 drones destroyed by weapons fire. 3 by malfunction. 0 hits on the target. But the Laboon's closest call, 320 meters, is a distance that a drone traveling at 40 knots covers in under 16 seconds. 16 seconds between a clean defense and a warhead detonating against a destroyer's hull. The next time, the drones will be faster. The swarms will be larger. The concealment will be better. And the targets might not be a destroyer with an Aegis radar and an experienced crew. They might be a tanker, a container ship, a cruise vessel transiting the Strait of Hormuz. 320 meters. That is not a victory margin. That is a countdown.